taken care of. We are now recording, and we're going to start sharing screen, and hopefully let's do this. All right, well, it is practically 1 on the dot here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm coming live from, and I am a stickler for time. My mother would otherwise not be happy with me. Welcome, everyone. We are so incredibly excited to have you here, whether you're joining us live or in the recorded version of this webinar on embedding choice and voice for all kids. Now, this is part 1. One of the fantastic things that we have worked on with all the hard work that John and Alice Keeler have been doing behind the scenes is that they've allowed us to do master classes. And I feel very fancy because I've always wanted to do Neil Gaiman's master class, but this will be Pernille's master class into choice and voice for all kids. This is part 1, and you can join us for any of the 3 parts. You can do them in order, but you don't have to, but they do kind of tie together and build together. So let's get started. I think it's very important that we start with a purpose in mind. What brought you here today? So if you can take a moment, and you can either unmute yourself and share, or you can share in the chat, but why are you here today, and what are you hoping to find? Would anyone care to share?
I am hoping to find some cool things to use for math. I teach Algebra 1.
I am right there with you. I'm not quite sure who it was that was speaking, but I also teach math. And I want to give my students that voice and the ability to talk about math and not just look for the answers and think about, okay, well, what am I supposed to say?
I'm also another math teacher, so yes, definitely looking to motivate my kids to be self-motivated learners.
And director of curriculum, and I'm trying to find resources to support our teachers, thinking about planning for next year and what that might look like. So trying to figure out that I've been using some of your stuff this year and love it.
I'm an academic technology coach, and I really love finding new and different ways to support student voice and choice options for all the teachers that I work with.
Wonderful. So whether you shared or not, and thank you to those who did, keep your purpose in mind today. And that's also why this is a more organic presentation. It's not just me with 60 slides, 1 for every minute, but it is truly a chance for you to answer questions or ask questions, and also share the resources that you have yourself. That's one of the powers that we have when we come together as educators, is knowing that there's more than one expert in the room. And I think that that's so important, especially in this time when many of us are still sitting in our homes and not getting that natural daily collaboration that we're used to because of the situation around us. And so when I think about my purpose, well, my purpose is really because I'm here because of the work I do with my own students. So typically my day is pretty incredible in room 203, Oregon, Wisconsin, a small city right outside of Madison, Wisconsin. This is a picture actually from my school year last year. I was digging through pictures, and I don't have a picture of me reading aloud this year, but I love this picture so much because it shares a snapshot of a moment that happened organically in our classroom. In this moment, you'll see that I'm sitting and reading aloud. I'm reading Jackie Woodson's On the Day You Begin Aloud to my 7th graders, a super common occurrence in our room. But what you'll also hopefully notice is the child sitting next to me. Jaslyn is reading the same book. However, she's reading it in her home language of Spanish. And the thing is, my special ed teacher is the person who took this picture, and I tweeted it out because I thought it was such a cool moment, and I wanted to capture having this moment with Jaslyn as kids got to listen to her read aloud as well. Oh, right away, I got all these accolades from people on Twitter. Wow, look at you, providing choice and voice and authenticity for students and all of these things. And I'm here to set the story straight. And I set it straight on social media right away as well, because this was not my planning. At no point had I pulled out my Spanish copy of the book and thought, Jaslyn speaks Spanish, I should ask her to read aloud with me. Instead, Jaslyn had seen the book sitting on my shelf, and when I told her that this is what I was going to read aloud, she was the one that said, well, can I read it in Spanish alongside you? I was smart enough to simply get out of the way and say, of course you can. But what this picture also doesn't show is that about 2 minutes after this picture was taken, Jaslyn looked at me and said in a perfect 7th grade voice, "This book is too long," and she slammed it shut and sat back down. And I think about this moment often, because if there's anything that I have learned in my many years as a teacher, it's that I don't have the best plans. That the best plans are the ones that I think of perhaps at home, but then bring to my students and have them share their voice so that they can become better. And so for the last 10 or so years, I've been on a mission to teach others what my students have taught me. That I'm better when I share control, that I'm better when I have their authentic voice as part of our planning and as part of our classroom. I was just reading a Danish Instagram educator who I follow, who's incredible, and she said, those who do the talking do the teach or do the learning. And I think about that often, because we often think that giving students voice means that we're finally giving them opportunity to speak. But what I've noticed instead is that in my mindset, I have to think of it as I'm not giving students a voice because they already have one. Instead, I'm giving them back the space so that they can start speaking up again. Because one of the things that we train students to do from the moment they come to us in kindergarten is to sit down and be quiet. And then when we ask them to start speaking up later, all of a sudden we wonder why they don't have anything to say. And so I think of how this also was ingrained in me. This is a beautiful snapshot of where I'm from. I'm from Bjerringbro, Denmark, that small dot in the middle of Jutland. I was born and raised, I think my city had more cows than people, probably population, I think 7,000. And if you had told me as a child that I was going to spend my adult life as a teacher in the American public school system, I would have left. Why would I ever leave Denmark? And yet my mom had a wandering heart. And she also saw big opportunities out in the world that she, as a professor herself, wanted to go out and explore. So when I was 6 years old, my mom told us, that she must have, I don't remember the conversation, that we were moving to San Francisco. I didn't know where San Francisco was. I assumed it was a few train stops further down than what we normally did. But little did I know that it would mean getting on an airplane for my first airplane ride, also throwing up on an airplane for the very first time, and then being immersed into a culture that I had only seen on TV. I didn't speak the language. I was 6 years old. My main language is Danish. And so I was put into an inner city classroom in the heart of San Francisco, and that's where I was taught English. I don't know if you can find me in this picture, but there I am, a blonde beacon sitting in the middle of this classroom. I remember not knowing how to communicate, especially when it came to very specific small things, such as asking to go to the bathroom, and realizing with horror that I didn't have the language to communicate my most basic needs. It didn't matter that my teacher was incredibly forthcoming and kind, that my classmates were interested in this foreign child that was plopped into their classroom, that they had ESL services, but no one spoke my language. I remember recognizing and realizing that if I was going to communicate and use my voice, I would have to either just leave and hope to find the bathroom, or mime it out, or of course, I could just not leave and then go to the bathroom right there. I mimed it out, and I can only imagine the horror that my teacher must have felt when she recognized that I was lacking these words. But after 7 months of being in this classroom, I was now fluent in English. That's the magic of small children and their language acquisition. We moved back to Denmark, same house, same friends, same school, except I was changed now. And we quickly fell into the habit of what it meant to be Danish again, but at the same time, also knowing that there was a much bigger world out there. When I was 13, my mom once again came to me and said, so I have this idea. And I was like, now where? And she said, Massachusetts, Lenox to be specific. She was going to do a job share, and I was going to go to 9th grade high school at Lenox High School. Well, this was the height of Beverly Hills 90210, and I knew everything there was about American high school because I'd seen it on TV. Imagine my shock when no Luke Perry pulled up on my first day of school wanting to give me a ride in his convertible. We stayed for a year, I made deep connections, and then it was time to come home again. Once again, I came back to the same school, the same house, the same friends, and yet I was once again changed. When I was 18, my mom said, so I have this idea. And I was like, now where? And she said, Wisconsin. And I said, where's that? Because I had never heard of that state. And she showed me, and I said, that looks cold. And I was right. And when I was 18, I walked through immigration in Boston, and I was invited into this country as an immigrant. I think about that experience of becoming an immigrant to this country and how it shapes everything I do. Because if you've never gone through immigration in the United States, I can tell you it's an incredibly lengthy and expensive and heart-rending experience. You hold your breath more than you have probably ever done in your life. Because at any moment, the people rifling through your papers and your medical records can tell you that you're not welcome, that despite you having spent all this money and all this time, you are not someone they want in this country. And little did I know, getting on that plane by myself, because I was going to go and live with some friends in Massachusetts before I moved in with my family, did I know that the immigration officer himself, the person I went up and declared myself as an immigrant to the United States in Logan Airport, would be the one that would hold my fate in his hands. But he took me back to a small room. He took my sealed envelope of papers, and then he didn't speak to me. He just went through the papers, and it wasn't until about 45 minutes into it, he finally took out a stamp, opened up my passport, and said, welcome to America. And then he let me out a back door. No one has ever questioned me or asked me for my papers since. I have worked and lived in this country now for 21 years, and I am assumed American because of my white skin. And I think about this a lot, especially after I got pulled over by the police one day, close to my home. My kids were in the car, and I didn't know what I had done. It was the first time and only that I've ever been pulled over. And of course, my kids are sitting in the back going, we can't wait to tell Dad. And I am panicking. I don't have my green card on me. And if you know anything about green cards, they are a legal document that you're supposed to carry with you at all times in case anyone from an authority purpose comes and asks you whether you're here legally. I didn't have it on me. It's expensive. I'm worried about losing it. But I could see my house. And in the moment that it took for me to pull over and the police officer to step out of their car and walk up to my window, I thought, this is it. I'm going to get deported. I rolled down my window, and the police officer asked me for my license. They didn't even ask about my green card. I had a brake light out, and I got off with a warning, and I drove home, and I started sobbing the minute I walked in the door, and my husband said, what is wrong? And of course the kids told him right away, Mom got pulled over. And he goes, why are you crying? Nothing happened. And I thought to myself, it was that moment of knowing that my fate was right in the hands of someone else. I shared this story on my blog because that's how I process, and someone said, well, that's easy. You look like an American. And I think about that a lot, because this isn't what an American looks like. This is what a Danish person looks like, with hundreds of years of heritage in Denmark, whose first language is Danish, who looks like the stereotypical Dane. But I think about that when it comes to our students and the assumptions that we wrap them in, whether it's because we've seen them coming from afar, or we've read their files, or perhaps the adults in their life didn't show up for open house, or perhaps they didn't return our phone call. And how often these assumptions become everything that we base our student knowledge on, and that the whole year before they've even joined us, we spend a lot of time trying to fit them into the box that we had already created for them. And so I think about this now as a teacher in the public school system in America. I'm a very proud educator, but also as a mom. I have 4 kids of my own. And I will tell you this, I send you my miracles. 3 of my kids were fertility. 1 was a miracle baby that was born 10 weeks premature and almost didn't make it. I send you my very best every single day. But I also know that my children are not perfect, that no matter how much we try to raise them and try to get them to make good decisions, they're bound to screw up. And sometimes their screw ups will be huge. And so what I need other educators to see is that when I send you my children, I send you my most precious, and that loving them, even on their bad days, even in the moments where you want to pull out your hair and you cannot understand how they made this choice or did this action, that they still need you to love them. I think about that a lot in my own teaching. This is me on the night before my very first day as a teacher ever. This is what terrified looks like. 4th grade, here I come. I spent that whole year trying to do all of the things that I had been taught that good teachers did. Good teachers graded, they did homework, they punished, they rewarded, they had special events for the kids who had earned it, and they used public shaming as a way to control other kids. They use public shaming as a way for kids to behave. The thing is, if you had come to my classroom that first year, you wouldn't have been terrified. You would have been like, yeah, she looks like she knows what she's doing. I had fantastic colleagues. I was in a very well-funded, well-supported school district, and I was doing the very best you could. I still have contact with some of my first years, and they tell me now, they're like, Mrs. Ripp, you were not as bad as you think you were. And yet on the inside, I now look back and think to myself, what happened? Because on the second year, the very first day, I had just finished all of my orientation spiels, and in walks a mother dragging her child behind her. She comes in front of me, doesn't introduce herself, but instead says, by way of greeting, I don't know what you're going to do with this kid. His father and I have already given up. Well, nice to meet you as well. And as she stood there and talked to me, she went down a long laundry list of all of the things that was wrong with her child. He doesn't do his homework. He doesn't like school. He doesn't really have friends. He gets into a lot of trouble. We try at home, but honestly, we're not going to really be as invested as you would like, because we expect you to figure it out. But don't worry, because his sister's coming in a few years and she is way better. And I remember standing there in the moment, seeing this child and everything that happened, all the words land on his shoulders, and I made the promise. And I'm fairly certain you know what the promise is, because we make it all the time. The promise where we say, this is going to be the year where this changes. I am going to be the teacher that shows you what it means to be a part of a community, what it means to find value in what we're learning, what it means to belong and feel safe. This is going to be the year that changes you. Because I thought I could save this kid. That my role was to come in and figure it all out. But the thing is, about a month into the school year, we were in exactly the same spot that his mom had already said we would be. He didn't do his work. He didn't care about grades. 4th grade was the first year that we did any kind of letter grades. And it didn't seem to matter that I would tell him, you're failing math. That wasn't a motivator. He would stay in from recess because he got in so much trouble and he had so much late homework. And I thought to myself, maybe if he and I just got more one-on-one time together, we will surely turn this around. But it turns out that one-on-one time was not what he was looking for. And he played the role so well. If he was going to be seen as the bad kid, quote unquote, then he was going to do everything in his power to play that role and to play it loudly and with pride. On the last day of school, he was suspended, 4th grader. And I saw him walk out from the principal's office being picked up by his dad and thinking to myself, that's it. I failed. Everything I had made a promise to do, the entire education experience I was going to share for this child was nothing that I had done. I'd done more of the same, and the result was the same. A child that didn't feel safe, accepted, valued at school, that saw no value in school. So I stood in my classroom and I made a decision, because I recognized that in that moment, all of the dreams that I had set out to do when I was sitting in college writing fictitious lesson plans was absolutely not panning out. And I was the only one to blame. I was actively crushing the dreams of 9-year-olds, and the 9-year-olds weren't even saying anything back, except for the ones that misbehaved, the troublemakers. So I went home and I told my husband that I had made a decision, and I said, I'm not going back. And he goes, well, yeah, you're on summer vacation. That's great. Of course you're not going back. Woohoo. And I was like, no, you don't understand. I shouldn't be a teacher. And he said something in that moment that was such a throwaway comment for him. But for me, it changed everything, because he said, you cannot change the students, but you can change the way you teach. And it was like the sky parted for me, that this is exactly what it was all about. That I had been so quick to try to shove these kids into the boxes of what a good student looked like, that I had completely lost them in the process. That instead of reflecting on how my decisions in this classroom were creating opportunities that were no longer safe or viable for these kids, that I was the one that needed to change. That it was never going to be enough if I needed to create more rules, more control, and have more power, that was never going to bring all the kids along. And so that year, I made a huge decision. I decided to question all of the practices that had kind of been passed on to me by these unknown educators saying, this is what good teachers do. And I started to question, why is it we think that this is what good teachers do? And I knew that the first step I had to start with that change was to ask my students, what do teachers do that make you feel safe? How can I be a better teacher for you? And so I started to reflect on this question. Who holds the most power in your school? And I think we all know the answer, because the answer is always going to be the adults. But how does that impact everything? Particularly if you are a kid that feels that they have no control over their day. So I'm going to offer up this moment for reflection. And I'm going to give you the same options that I do in my classroom, which is you can reflect in your head. You don't have to say anything or do anything out loud. If you have something to write with, you can reflect in written form. Or if you would like to reflect out loud with the group, because here we are, please take a moment to do that. So if anyone would like to just reflect on this question out loud, please do so right now.
I honestly, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I honestly think that you can see it in the dynamics of the school at large when you walk the halls. In my school, we don't have doors. We're an enclosed, an open space school. And so you can see classrooms where the kids are alive and talking and moving. And you can see classrooms that are quiet and maybe the teacher's talking or maybe everybody's doing their own thing. But it's a very obvious feeling when you walk around to see what class community has the students with some power and choice and what classrooms do not.
One of the things that hits me, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, one of the things that strikes me is the importance of empowerment and how choice and teaching, it isn't about necessarily just engaging them, we need to move to the next step, and I think choice and voice is where empowerment happens, and it's just amazing when you see it in class.
This is a question that I come back to a lot, especially in the last 2 months when the world paused. This is what my classroom looks like now. I feel like a glorified secretary most of the time, writing email upon email, trying to set up some sort of meeting or a Zoom or something to reach out to my students so that they can still feel connected to the community that we created. I have tweeted on occasion that I have never felt more ineffective as an educator than I do right now. Because all of a sudden, everything that we knew was already needing to be fixed in our classrooms has only become blown up. And I think about this state of emergency and how I'm seeing a lot of bad practices now being paraded as the answer to everything. As if we all of a sudden have lost sight of what best practices for kids is. And yet it feels really overwhelming. How do you give voice and choice and empower students when you're not there to physically do so? How do we stop education from becoming this create a production and turn our product and turn it in and check off that learning box? How do we manage? Because that's what I feel like right now, a manager. All of the learning that needs to happen for every child to still feel valuable and safe and seen, and as if what we do matters to them, and not just from a grade standpoint, but from a human being standpoint. And so I guess I'm here to remind you that although I have been given this platform to speak to you, that I'm only here because I've chosen to speak loudly of the failures that I have had as an educator through the years, that I've learned from those failures and decided to share them on a public forum, because I don't want us to continually have these perfect teacher myths. I know I sat in my own classroom reading lots of professional development books and thinking that those teachers surely had it figured out. And it turns out when I got to meet some of those people that I admire, that they were also sitting in their classrooms thinking that other teachers had it figured out. But I killed myself those first couple of years thinking if I just worked a little bit harder, a little bit longer, then it would work for every child. When the one thing that I was missing the most was the voice of students embedded authentically into my classroom. And I think about my own kids' journey into this school machine. This is Taya, my oldest. She's now 11. She was 5 at this time. And Taya has always wanted to be a teacher. I have video of her teaching my 5th graders ABC, even though she didn't know the ABC when she was quite young. School was where magic was going to happen, and kindergarten was going to be the place that she finally got to start for real on the journey of becoming a teacher. She was going to learn math and how to read and how to write and make 3 new friends all in the span of that first day of school. She had her outfit picked out for weeks. And yet on the 5th day of her kindergarten career, she came home and she said, I don't want to go to school. And we thought, of course, her father and I, that she was tired, that going from 4K and summer and then into 5K was a huge transition and she would be fine. But yet she repeated it on day 6, I hate school. On day 7, I hate school, Mom. And on day 8, she said, my teacher hates me. And we were like, what do you mean? She's amazing and funny and she likes you. And she goes, no, she hates me. And we had to write a really awkward email to her teacher going, Dad, this is probably not true, but we want you to know that our kid thinks you hate her. And what are you seeing? And she had to write an equally awkward email back to us saying that's not true. And yet we didn't engage Taya in conversation. And on day 11, Taya said to us, I have a stomach ache. Please don't make me go. And that's when we knew that we had a problem. Because I looked at her and I said, but honey, you got to go to school. How else are you going to be a teacher? And she goes, Mom, I don't want to be a teacher. Teachers don't like children. In 2.5 weeks of kindergarten, Taya decided that school was not a place for her. Despite coming from a family of teachers, despite having everything that on paper should lead to school success, my 5-year-old didn't feel like school was a place for her anymore and had already given up on a dream that she had held on tightly to for years. And I think about that because I was so frustrated, because I kept thinking, why can't she just believe me when I say that her teacher likes her and school is awesome? Why is it that we can't get her to see the truth? And it wasn't until I was talking to friends of mine, and Leah Whitford, an amazing principal in Kenosha, Wisconsin, looked at me and she said, you know, Pernille, it doesn't matter what the truth is. What matters is her perception of the truth. And in her perception of the truth, school's not a place for her. And it hit me hard, because how often do we dismiss the perception that children have of school? When they walk into our classroom and they say, I hate reading, or I hate math, or I'm not liking this teacher, or I don't feel safe, or their words don't even speak for them, but their behaviors do. How often do we dismiss everything they're saying because we know better? How often do we say that teacher doesn't hate you, or you just haven't found the right book yet, or some other dismissal, rather than turning around and saying, tell me more about that. Why don't you think that teacher likes you? Why don't you feel safe? Why do you hate reading or math or science? Why does your behavior tell me that you don't feel safe in this environment? That's been my mission the last 10 years, turning that question around on kids and saying, tell me more. How can I make this better for you? How can we make this better for you? Because we see it play out in the adults too. How many adults in their school buildings feel like they have no voice? Like they're not going to be a part of the decision making, that perhaps they're surveyed, but nothing happens with the words that they share, that only select fews get to hold the power. We get frustrated as adults, and yet we turn around and we do the exact same thing to kids. And then we wonder why engagement is a problem. And so I think about some of the words from people that I admire, including Tony Sinanis, Assistant Superintendent out in New York, and Joe Sanfilippo, a superintendent here in Wisconsin, that in their book, Hacking Leadership, they came with this quote: "We set up schools for the adults and not for the kids." How often are our decisions based on what we think kids need versus what adults need? How often do we pull in a scripted curriculum because it's going to be easier for the teachers to teach, and we can all be on the same page and teach with fidelity, which is my least favorite F word? Who are we really setting schools up for? And right now, when we are in this conundrum of what is going to happen and what will happen in the fall, or what does your school look like right now during this global pandemic, how are we even including the voices of children? Because it feels like to me that they have been completely excluded, and we're back to shutting the door on them and saying the adults know best. How many educators are even involved in this conversation? We have a problem when it comes to the power structure within our schools, and we can see it in engagement research. Over 3 years, the Center for Evaluation and Education Policy asked more than 350,000 high schoolers in the United States, how engaged were they within a week of school? This was their answer. 2 out of 12 high schoolers said that they were bored every single class. When I first saw this, I was like, well, of course they'll say that. They're high schoolers. But you can't dismiss 3 years of asking 350,000 students. I also was upset because I was like, oh, why didn't they teach elementary or ask elementary or middle schoolers, younger kids, the kids I work with? But the thing is, kids who are about to graduate are at the end of their journey. They're the ones that are going to go out and vote and make policy and perhaps become teachers, or perhaps never want to set foot in school again. So it's smart to ask those kids because they're at the end of the journey. They're after we have passed them from one caring teacher to another, and yet they tell us that they're bored every class. This isn't the only engagement research that's out there. You can see it drop, and I've experienced it myself. Going from middle school to elementary, there was no time. On the second day of school, as a 7th grade teacher, I felt behind, like I was never going to get to the end of the year. Whereas in elementary, I felt like I had some wiggle room to at least do some bigger things with students. I will also say I've never worked harder than I did as an elementary teacher, trying to prep all of my classes. Moving to the middle school and all of a sudden prepping one class, I was like, what is this vacation? Now being in middle school for longer, I forget how hard and how much I had to work in elementary. Now that's not to say that middle school teachers don't work hard, because they do, but it's a different type of hard. And so I think about this, because this is what school looks like for some. These are my own kids, but this is also for kids who have heat, who have a house, who have food, who have devices, who have Wi-Fi, who have adults that can sit down with them. This is not the reality for a lot of the kids in the United States and around the world right now. We have an incredible inequity playing out in education right now. And so I think about this because this was clearly taken on a good day. And the more I think about this picture, I'm wondering if they're even doing schoolwork or if they're all just surfing on YouTube. Because this was not my reality right today. My reality today was very different than this. And so I think about this disengagement and how it's nothing new. We dealt with it before when we were physically in the classroom, but we had so many more tools at our disposal, including human connection. Now disengagement plays out in emails that aren't responded to, meetings that aren't, where kids don't show up, phone calls that are not returned, or even obstacles that are placed in front of them that have nothing to do with their choices, but everything to do with their circumstances. So I've been asking my students for years, when do you withdraw from a class or community? What is it that happen? And these are some of the answers that come up year after year. No connection, whether to the community or to the teacher that's in charge of it. They don't see urgency, or they feel they have no power in what we do, and it doesn't matter whether they invest because it's not going to change the assumptions that surround them. When the teacher talks too much or doesn't differentiate, when learning is another chore and just a checkbox, when life is too big and we might not even know about it because we haven't earned their trust, and also when they're constantly reminded of their failures. My heart belongs to kids who have a harder time with reading. It's the core of the work that I do, because I think about how hard school is for kids who can't read at grade level. How in every class they are reminded of a deficit that they don't have control over. And so when I think about this, I think about how it plays out now in this online world, where so much of our teaching right now is based on reading and then writing. How are we taking in the impact of the emotions on kids who might not be reading and writing at grade level, who are maybe not getting the extra help that they need? And I'm not even talking about special education students. I'm talking about all the kids that you know you had to give extra support to. What does that look like right now? Because this is also my reality. My 6-year-old is in kindergarten. She loves her teachers. She has told me over and over how I am the worst teacher that she has ever had, and that this school sucks. And that's true. I cannot be what my kids' teachers were to them. I cannot replicate a community of learning with other kids who are eager to share their everyday discoveries and observations. I can give them everything I have and I can do the best I can, but it's simply not enough some days. And so I think about this question, because right now I feel like what your school values is deeply being embedded into the future decisions of what education is going to look like. And right now I think about this a lot, that if the first answer to this question isn't the well-being of students, then we shouldn't be in the business of educating. Because if we're not creating opportunities for students to actually have a chance to have an impact on how education is going to look for them, especially as we enter into this unknown territory of perhaps blended learning or online starts or whatever it is we're doing, how are we going to show students that we value them if their voices are not included in those conversations? And I'm not just talking about high schoolers or college level kids, I'm talking about even our youngest students. So I'd like you to answer out, and you might need to do this in the chat box. Which type of student, in your opinion, out of these 4 categories would be the most successful in your school? Normally I'd have people move to a corner, but since we're virtual, we're gonna make this work. So I can't see the chat box. Alice, can you show me what is the most common answer, in your opinion, that's showing up?
Hardworking, thinking, organized, hardworking, very much hardworking and organized.
Hardworking and organized. Okay, so if we were in a room, most of you would be in that corner. So looking at this now, hang on to whichever one you picked. Now it says, once I move here, what skills should schools be developing with children? So the same skills, but which skills should we be spending the most time on? Go ahead and enter in your answer in the chat. And then think back to the choice that you picked before. Do they line up? And why or why not? Well, and does anyone want to share what they are thinking right now?
I love the work of Angela Duckworth and grit. I feel like having the grit, and you just have to have grit to get through the situations. And with that grit, I think you need to really hone in on the power of just being resilient, because you're going to have things that happen and you're going to have to work through those failures or those first attempts at learning, as we like to call them, to really work through it. So I think with a combination of grit and resiliency.
I think I would disagree, only when I think about my students of color who have a lot of grit and a lot of resiliency, and they aren't doing well in school. So you can't find any grittier people than African American people. They are rising above all the limited structures that we've placed in front of them. And so I think that we need to teach children to their strengths, and that would be being creative and original in their thinking and their ideas and their skills. We also need to stop thinking of kids as deficit-based and move towards more of an asset-based model.
I would agree 100%. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think often, of course, we all need resilience because that's a skill we all need, but often we dismiss the type of resilience that children are already coming in with. And we often say, well, they just need to work harder. And I've also found that that's a uniquely American thing, the whole idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. When I talk to my Danish educator friends, this isn't that big of a thing. And so when I think about this exercise, it's actually like you led me perfectly into the next one. Who are the hardest working children in our schools? Because I would say in my experience for the last 12 years, the hardest working kids in my school and in my care have been the kids with the biggest obstacles. But those are not the ones that we assume is working the hardest. Those are often the kids that are still not making the gains, or perhaps they are not where they should be, or perhaps their behavior is still a huge problem. And so we dismiss all of that hard work because they haven't cracked the code of what it means to be a good student yet. We often assume that our kids who are getting good grades or being assessed in a proper way are the ones that are working the hardest. And this becomes an incredibly self-fulfilling prophecy. Because when we then look at perception research, we can start to see how these perception assumptions play out in schools, in kids' future choices within school. If I look at a child and I perceive them as high-level comprehending children, high-performing children, I'm going to have more creative teaching solutions with them, more open-ended work opportunities for them. I'm going to have a better relationship. My classroom management is going to be a lot more congenial. We're going to have a lot more time to cover a lot more things. That's just within my classroom. The minute I leave my classroom and talk about that child, my words are going to be a lot more positive about that child. And that means that new possibilities are going to open up for that child. Maybe they're going to be invited to anything extracurricular or lunch groups or leadership opportunities. Because who are also the kids that we constantly ask to be a part of our committees? It's the kids that we see with the highest grades. How often do we exclude student voices because we're afraid of what they're going to say, or because we assume that they need to earn their place? Whereas instead, we should be tapping into the kids who are raising their voices, but maybe telling us things that we don't want to hear, whether through their speaking or through their behavior, and saying, be a part of this committee so that we can listen to you. The thing is, too, when we then look at that perception research, when we look at kids that we see as low performing, our teaching changes. They get less, we go much slower. We don't do open-ended work with them. We assume that they don't understand, and so everything is broken down. They have a lot less choice because we remove that in order to make it accessible. So our classroom management takes up a lot larger space in our time together, and our relationships suffer. Those are also the kids that we don't go out and then recommend for leadership positions. Those are also the ones that we maybe don't feel that close relationship to. And so I keep coming back to this assumption of who do we assume is working the hardest in our schools? Because I will tell you, I have had kids with all Fs that worked so hard to even show up because they didn't feel safe in our space. And that was on me, the adult. And so I think about this a lot, because engagement flourishes when students feel protected, cared for, trusted, respected, challenged, that their whole self is accepted, and that they can find success. And that hasn't changed. Now we just have to figure out, how do we translate this to an online or blended learning environment? Because we still need these things for kids to want to connect. This is why I'm terrified of starting online in September. Those kids have no relationship with me yet. And so much of why my students, my 76 students, are showing up right now is because of the community we established when we were face-to-face. And so I'm thinking about ways to still give voice and choice to my students. And I think about Carla Shalaby's words here in Troublemakers, one of the best PD books I've ever read, even though it's a book that doesn't offer up solutions, that our schools are designed to prepare children to take their assumed place in the social order, rather than to question and challenge that order. That's why I also bristle at like the whole oh, we need to be kind above everything else, because we use kindness as a way to silence voices that we disagree with. And so when we're talking about authentic voice and choice, We have to be prepared to have conversations that are probably going to hurt our feelings. But you know what? I'm 40 years old. I can handle it. Does it hurt? Sure. Is it going to kill me? No, it's not. But I can't change my teaching if I don't open it up to authentic conversations where every child feels like they get the right to question what I'm doing. And I used to really frame it in a way of, I want to teach you how to advocate for yourself. And I still do. But I rolled back on the, this is how you approach adults, because the thing is, revolutions were started because people told them to be silent, right? I think about that a lot. And a student asked me this year, and he said, well, you know, civil rights, couldn't they just have kept protesting peacefully? And I said they did, but nobody listened. And so I think about that if we don't teach children that it's okay for them to raise their voice, that it's okay for them to advocate, that it's okay to bring the facts and present it and pursue other options if that door is shut in your face, then we're really not creating kids that can go out in the world and become global citizens, because that's what you need. That's what we should be graduating. So how do we design opportunities for our classroom for true empowerment and voice without getting our feelings hurt? And so I think about this question a lot. Would I want to be a student in my own classroom? And back in, in fourth grade, when I was still teaching fourth grade, the answer would have been no. Pernille, the 9-year-old, would have hated everything we were doing in my classroom. She would have wanted to be seen and valued and accepted and given choice. She would have wanted to have a way to change the things that we were doing, to put her own twist on it. And so I use this as a guiding voice now, and I have been for the last 10 years. But instead of just looking at myself, I also see it through the parent lens. Would my 4 very distinctly different kids thrive in my own classroom? Would my decisions and my teaching style work for all 4 of them if they were in there at the same time? And the thing is, I don't just sit and wonder and give myself a pat on the shoulder. I ask my students, is this working for you? Do you feel respected by me? And so when I think about these questions, this is huge, because right now, with this online blended learning or emergency remote teaching or whatever it is we want to call it, we're really just writing sub-plans for others to implement. So how can we then still create opportunities that will make space for kids to thrive? And that's what I'm working with in my own work, and what this masterclass will also go deeper with. And so one of the rule of thumbs that we've been working on, and that I'm going to continue to work on, especially if we start online, is that whatever I would assume my students could get done, I'm going to cut in half and then cut in half again. Because I noticed that even my own 4 children are falling apart. That something that would normally take 20 minutes is taking an hour. That even my well-established, pretty calm little girl sits and cries in front of her computer because the world feels really heavy right now. The kids are not okay, and neither are the adults. And so what are we truly asking kids to do? And are we doing our own work in order to make sure that we know how long it takes? And so for me right now, it's not how my teaching looks, although I try to make it as flashy as I can with the tools that I use. It's how it feels. Do my students feel, first of all, that whatever I'm asking them to do is accessible for them? And when I say accessible, I teach kids that are at about a 2nd grade reading level through a college. Is it accessible for all of them? Are there opportunities for all of them to jump into the learning? Or do they feel like from the very first moment that they come across the learning that it is not going to be something that they're going to be successful? Is it accepting of who they are? Am I asking them to somehow change their personality in order to be an established member of our community? Or is every child, no matter their mood and no matter their journey to our classroom, accepted at their face value? And of course, is it engaging? And I don't know if it's going to be engaging because I'm not a 7th grader. So I constantly ask my students, does this work for you? How can I change it? The reason why, and I'll talk more about this in part 2, the learning, choose your own learning that my students have been engaged with, gosh, now for 7 weeks. The reason it started with 4 options and now have 9 is because my students said we want an option for this. And then it was my job as the adults to come up with an option that would work for us. And so take a moment to reflect right now. We'll kind of do this reflection again. What are the emotions that are being elicited in your students from your current teaching? And how do you know? So again, I'm going to ask you to reflect, and I'll move my, I don't know how this looks on your end. I feel like I'm staring at my picture. There you go. You know, which emotions are being produced in your students due to your teaching, and how do you know? And if you are a staff trainer, administrator, what are the emotions in your staff right now? The decisions that you're making, and how do you know? And if anyone wants to share out loud, that would be fabulous.
I don't think it has to do with my teaching per se, but my kids talk about sadness a lot just because we're not together as a community. But I think that's actually separate from my teaching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sadness is a big emotion that I'm running into a lot too. And I think that that's hard to navigate. So here I am really just thinking about like our teaching, what other emotions is our teaching kind of putting on top of the kids who may already be feeling sadness, loneliness, all of these emotions.
We have Jen Neal shares that passionate and excited, engaging in their own inquiry of choice.
Mm.
And then we have Val says she's supporting teachers and they're so overwhelmed. They feel frustrated with the inequalities and sadness with not being able to connect with some of their students.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say I appreciate the way that you rephrased that for those of us who are working to support teachers, because I've been really focused on like, oh, these teachers need to be asking students how they're feeling, and not really thinking like I should be asking teachers what they're feeling, what they need, and how I can best support them. You know, I put it into emails and stuff like, let me know if you have any questions, but I don't know that I'm thinking to really ask them. I'm just assuming that they're feeling overwhelmed or they're feeling, you know, overloaded, but not really asking them, and they're my students. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and you know what? Our principal, my incredible principal, Shannon Anderson here in Oregon, asked us, I think it was a week ago, she does a weekly newsletter, and there was a survey in it, and it was, how are you feeling? And what can I do for you right now? And while she didn't need to do anything for me, it was amazing to be able to say, I hate this so much. I told her that. I said, I hate this so much. I'm making it work and my students say it's going well, but personally, I find very little pleasure and love in what we're doing right now. This is not the type of teaching that I want to do. And to be able to say that in a safe space and know that she would have done something for me, even if it would just be a check-in conversation, was huge. Because right now, I don't know about all of you, but I certainly feel really alone. And I feel like I'm supposed to put on this hero face. Teachers can do anything. We've got it. We can figure it out. And I'm sitting here at home going, I don't know what I'm always doing. I was never taught how to be an online teacher. How can I learn how to do this better? And how can I take what I already know to be true and now transfer it online? And so if you're not sure, ask your students, because, and we're almost at the end here, we have the best professional development. No longer are they sitting right in our classrooms. They're sitting behind screens. But as much as I love being invited to share my ideas, I'm really just here as someone who's facilitating and sharing what my students have taught me throughout the years. But you don't need my students to ask these questions. You have your own students to go back and ask. And right now, especially if you're a teacher that's wrapping up their year right now, don't miss out on this incredible learning opportunities to ask the kids, are you okay? What's working and what's not? Because a lot of us are going to go into summer with time off, with our head spinning, trying to figure out how am I going to create a program in whatever capacity I'm going to be teaching in the fall, or how am I going to support my teachers going into the fall? Right now is an incredible time to start asking questions. What has worked for you and what hasn't? Did you feel respected? How did you feel when we did this? What do you need from me to be successful? And so thinking about some of the questions that you could be asking right now to shape your practice is really going to be your homework for the next week. And then going out and asking. So if you work with teachers like some of you do, what are questions that you could ask your teachers to figure out how to better support them that go beyond perhaps the typical questions that we ask? And if you're working directly with students, what are the questions you could be asking right now to shape your practice? I shared earlier today on my Twitter account and in my Facebook group a weekly check-in form that I make with students. And it's just a form. It's in their Teams that they use. And it just is like, I ask about their reading, but then I also ask, what could you use from me right now? And I have some pre-filled in options, a Google Meet with your teacher, a guidance counselor check-in, perhaps a terrible joke, because I have nothing but terrible dad jokes. We've done cute animal pictures. I think this week it's terrifying animal pictures. How about a music video from when I was 13, because everybody wants to hear Danish pop music from 1993, or other. How about a virtual hug? So many of my students are letting me know that this week they could really use a virtual hug. And I always ask too at the bottom, anything else? And many of my students will say, nope, nothing, we're good. But others will tell me things that they just need to get off their chest. So what are questions that you could be asking? I know I've been asking my students, what else would you like to do? How else can I make this easy for you? We've done one round of choose your own learning. What needs to change? Ask those questions. If you're working with younger students, it's going to be a little bit harder to do a survey. Perhaps get those at home to help them answer the questions. Perhaps when you are doing some weekly, I know many younger teachers who are teaching younger kids are doing weekly check-ins with their students. What questions can you ask them face-to-face in order to prepare you for possibly being online in the fall as well? And so I want to give us just a few moments to take questions here at the end. This is your homework. What are questions you can ask your students and staff before next week in order to shape your own practice, in order to start giving them more voice, authentic voice and empowerment and engagement? And then looking forward, part 2 of this masterclass will be May 26th, also at the same time. And it's going to be really diving in and using, okay, we've asked questions. Now, how can we use that as professional development? And how do we embed choice throughout our curriculum and learning environment? Because it goes so beyond just what we're doing, both virtually, but also face-to-face, because at some point we're going to be face-to-face. I'm going to just sit in that bubble and believe it and hang on to it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but this is your chance to kind of jump in with any questions or resources or ideas or takeaways you want to share.
We had one question in the chat, is if you could have any tips about how to build relationships in online classes.
I know for me with my 7th graders, it has been through humor that we're building relationship. So it's like I find really dumb cahoots that I know that they're probably not going to know. And like the kids that can show up, we do that. I have sent them all handwritten letters with my address and phone number on it so that they can reach me. I've also simply asked them, because I've had a couple kids that are like, I need social interaction and it's not enough to just be with my friends. And so I like monitor, I have a group of kids that get together and I just sit in the back and they do like a scribble drawing game that they're doing. I'm just there in case, like as the adult representative, but I'm not a part of it. So I've really asked kids, like, what would you like to build community? Because they're not super into like the Zoom meetings, kind of like the adults, right? It's awkward to sit and have a conversation with 25 other people. So we're doing challenges as well. We had like an ongoing Kahoot game and we had winners and like stupid prizes and stuff like that. So I'm using humor a lot to try to draw kids in. Anyone else have other ideas? There's lots of us here.
I like that you talked about letter writing. That's been one way to help my kids a lot. We've done dialogue journals in our classroom this year. So some of my students felt the loss of that conversation in written form so keenly. So I just started writing letters and sending them self-addressed stamped envelopes, and that seemed to help some of them a lot.
Can I share that my daughter's teacher took her Bitmoji and blew it up like this big, and on a piece of paper has several different Bitmojis for a flat Stanley, and then made a calendar of activities that they could do together if they wanted to take some pictures and share them. And all of the activities were, let's take a walk together and let's empty the dishwasher together. Nothing like do your schoolwork together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is officially our time, 2 o'clock on the dot. Thank you. What an honor to be here with you. And I hope that you took something away from it. And if you didn't, feel free to email me and be like, well, that was a waste of my time. Because I'll take feedback and advice. But
I took your entire presentation.
Right? Seriously. But thank you so much for trusting us with your PD. And I'm so excited for this entire 14-week opportunity to just come together and have free PD. Yay, there isn't enough free in education. So this is just so amazing. Thank you, everyone. Oh, and if you need me, I'm very Googleable, and Alice is going to say something right now. Yes.
I was just going to say, to get into her sessions for next week, we're going to have the registration up really soon. It's a lot. We were able to, like, here's the first one, upload this. But we do have the whole schedule. I do have her on the calendar and ready to import in. And so if you'll go to Microsoft, q.org, yes, q.org/Microsoft, you'll be able to register for those. They'll be up really soon. So this is a 3-week. So I hope that you will all return next week, same time, same day. And then the 3rd week, same time, same day.
And we have office hours. There's office hours on Friday, which is truly like drop on in and we can talk. So if you have like a problem of practice that you just want to talk through or something like that, come in. I have no clue what we're going to do because I have nothing planned. I'm just going to be sitting in a room. So if you have things that you just want to talk about, or you have something you want to share with me that you think I should know about, like, here's your chance. So office hours, look for those too, because that's kind of an amazing opportunity.
Huge opportunity. So if you go again to the q.org/Microsoft, you can right now register for this Friday's office hours, and that's a treat.
Yes. So take care, everyone, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Pernille. This was so good.